TIFU by accidentally insulting my boss in front of the entire company during our annual meeting. So, here's the deal. I've been working at this mid-sized tech company for about 3 years. I'm part of a small but tight-knit team, and I've always gotten along with my colleagues. We're a bunch of nerds, just like me, and we're used to spending hours on end talking about our work and sometimes even random things like the best pizza toppings or which Marvel character would make the best CEO. We have a lot of nerdy debates. Now, every year, the company hosts this big annual meeting to celebrate achievements, announce new goals, and give out awards. It's a pretty big deal, and everyone from the CEO to the interns gets together in a conference room to hear about the state of the company. The last meeting was no different, and, for the most part, it's just a bunch of PowerPoint slides with motivational speeches from the higher-ups. Not the most thrilling event, but it's part of the culture, so we all show up. This year, our CEO, Greg, decided to shake things up a bit. He wanted to make it a more interactive event with audience engagement. I was already nervous about it, but I figured I'd be fine. It's just a big company meeting, right? The meeting started like usual with some introductory slides. People were catching up, chatting, and I was just half listening, scrolling through my phone to check out the latest news. Then, about halfway through, Greg decided to hand out a few special recognition awards. Now, I have to explain something about Greg. He's the kind of guy who tries a little too hard to be funny and relatable. He'll crack jokes that seem kind of forced, and everyone laughs nervously, mostly out of obligation. He's a nice guy, but his humor can sometimes be, well, off. Greg gets to the first award and announces that it's for Best Team Player. He starts giving a little speech about how important teamwork is, how we all need to help each other out, blah blah blah. He then calls up one of the senior developers, Tom, who has been with the company for years and is a kind of company legend. Tom is the guy everyone knows, respects, and talks about when they mention the old guard. Greg hands him the award, says a few more words, and then asks the crowd to give him a round of applause. Everyone cheers. Then Greg announces the next award, Most Innovative Employee of the Year. My name gets called. I'm shocked. I'm not one of those people who expects recognition, and in fact, I had no idea I was even in the running for this award. Greg goes on about how I've been at the forefront of some key initiatives, driving forward some new tools we've been working on, and how my creative thinking has brought a lot of success to the company. People start clapping. I get up, walk up to the stage, and accept the award. Everyone's smiling, clapping, and I'm doing my best to look humble, even though my mind is racing. Now, here's where things go south. As I walk up to the stage, I notice Greg's face. He's smiling, but it's one of those smiles where he's holding back something. He's got this glint in his eye that immediately puts me on edge. He asks me to say a few words to the audience. I stand there with the award in my hand, trying to think of something eloquent to say, but my nerves are starting to get the best of me. It's hard for me to speak in front of large groups, and I'm feeling the weight of the moment. I don't want to sound too cocky or like I'm just giving a canned speech. I want to be genuine. So, I take a deep breath, smile, and start speaking. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate this recognition. It's been a great year, and I'm glad to be part of such an amazing team here. I especially want to thank Greg for his leadership and vision. He's always pushing us to do better, and it's been inspiring. At this point, Greg's expression shifts slightly, and I think he's pleased with what I said. I'm feeling a little more relaxed, but then I make the mistake of trying to add a bit of humor to the speech. You see, I'd been working on a project with Greg that had gone way over schedule, and it had been a huge pain. It wasn't just on me, it was a team effort, but Greg had been, shall we say, enthusiastic about pushing us to work faster, even when things were clearly not going to be done on time. Without thinking, I continue, and of course, thank you to Greg for always making sure we're never, ever running out of things to do. If there's one thing Greg does well, it's keeping us on our toes with plenty of deadlines and a constant stream of emails that are, let's say motivational. I smile awkwardly, hoping to land this as a light-hearted joke. I even look at Greg, who is standing at the side of the stage, waiting for me to finish. But as soon as I say this, the room goes silent. The smile drops off Greg's face. I look around at the audience, and they're all staring at me, unsure whether I'm joking or not. I immediately realize my mistake. It wasn't a funny joke, and it didn't land the way I hoped it would. Greg looks uncomfortable, and I can see his face starting to redden. I try to recover. I mean, it's all in good fun, Greg, really. We've been through a lot together this year, and I appreciate your constant energy and drive. You're always pushing us to be our best. But it's too late. The damage is done. Greg forces a tight smile and thanks me for my kind words, but there's a noticeable tension in the air now. I quickly finish my speech, shuffle back to my seat, and try to shrink into the chair, my face burning with embarrassment. The rest of the meeting proceeds in an awkward haze. I can't focus on anything that's being said because all I can think about is how I just insulted my boss in front of the entire company. After the meeting, I try to catch Greg to apologize, but he's surrounded by people, and he looks like he's in a rush. I decide to shoot him an email later that evening, explaining that I didn't mean to make him uncomfortable and that I was just trying to be lighthearted. I don't expect a reply right away, but at least I've acknowledged my mistake. The next morning, I walk into the office to find Greg standing near the coffee machine. I'm expecting the worst. But he looks at me, and to my surprise, he actually smiles. "Hey, I got your email. Don't worry about it, kid. You're all right." We exchange a few more words, and just like that, the tension seems to lift. It's clear that he wasn't thrilled by my comment, but at least he wasn't holding it against me. So, that's my story. I've learned a valuable lesson: jokes about deadlines and emails? Probably not the best choice when you're standing in front of your boss at the company's biggest event of the year. Hopefully, next year's meeting will be a little less eventful for me, but I'm not holding my breath. TLDR, I insulted my boss during the company's annual meeting by making a joke about his relentless emails and deadlines. He didn't take it well, and the entire room went silent. I apologized, and luckily, it was all smoothed over. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. A few weeks ago, I decided to take my new girlfriend Emma on a date. Things had been going great between us, texting every day, having deep conversations, and really connecting. I wanted to do something special for her, so I decided to invite her over for a homemade dinner. Now, I'm no Gordon Ramsay, but I've always thought I was at least decent in the kitchen. I figured cooking would be a great way to show her that I was thoughtful, capable, and, well, I'm not sure what else, but I thought it would impress her. I settled on making something simple but elegant: chicken Alfredo with a side of garlic bread. How hard could that be? I watched a couple of YouTube videos and read some recipes online to make sure I had the basics down. I felt pretty confident. This was going to be a smooth, romantic evening. The night arrived, and Emma showed up at my place around 7 p.m. I was a little nervous, but I greeted her with a smile, pretending everything was under control. She looked great as usual, and she complimented me on how nice my place looked. I led her to the kitchen where everything was prepped: chicken, pasta, butter, garlic, cream, everything in place. I'd even gone the extra mile and bought some fancy Parmesan cheese. I was definitely stepping up my game here. I started by cooking the chicken. It was supposed to be pan-seared to golden perfection. I seasoned it lightly with salt, pepper, and a little paprika for color. The sizzle of the chicken in the pan sounded great. Emma was chatting with me from the dining table, and I was trying to keep my focus on the food while also being charming and engaging. But, you know how it is when you're a little nervous. I might have been a little too eager to impress, and I didn't pay attention to the heat under the pan. I cranked it up a little too high, thinking it would speed up the cooking process. The chicken started to cook a bit faster than expected, too fast, actually. It started browning way quicker than I anticipated, and I thought I'd just push through. I kept flipping it, trying to avoid burning it. Meanwhile, I was supposed to be making the sauce. I melted butter in another pan and added the garlic. I was thinking, this is going great, until I realized my chicken was starting to get a little too crispy. I turned down the heat to make sure I didn't burn it entirely. But when I flipped the chicken over, there was a strange smell. It wasn't the smell of perfectly seared chicken. It smelled burnt. I tried to salvage it. I thought, okay, no big deal. Just slice off the burnt parts. But then it hit me, I was running out of time. The chicken was already halfway done, but I still needed to cook the pasta and make the sauce. So, I put the chicken in the oven to finish cooking. Big mistake. I moved on to the pasta. I threw the noodles in a boiling pot of water and, of course, I got distracted talking to Emma, who was still sitting at the table, laughing at something I'd said. That's when I realized the water was rapidly boiling over. I quickly turned down the heat, but the damage was done, there was pasta water all over the stove. I groaned internally, but I tried to keep my cool, wiping it up as quickly as possible while still trying to hold a conversation. Now, the sauce. This was supposed to be the easy part. I added the heavy cream to the melted butter and garlic, stirring carefully to combine. It was looking pretty good, but then I made the fatal error of turning the heat up too high. I was trying to get the sauce to thicken quickly, but I wasn't watching it closely enough. Before I knew it, the sauce began to bubble and then suddenly, it started to splatter. Hot cream everywhere. A huge splatter hit my arm. I jumped back, and as I did, I knocked the pan of chicken that I had just taken out of the oven. The chicken slid off the counter and onto the floor. It was now officially ruined. Not even salvageable. I stood there, frozen, holding my burnt arm, watching as my dinner went up in smoke, literally. Emma got up and walked over to me, concerned. "Are you okay?" she asked. She looked at the mess in the kitchen, then at me, and her eyes widened in disbelief. Yeah," I said, trying to play it off. "Just a little kitchen accident. No big deal." But it was a big deal. It was a disaster. I took the chicken out of the oven, hoping I could maybe scrape off the burnt bits, but it was too far gone. And the pasta? It had become a mushy mess because I'd overcooked it. The sauce? I didn't even want to talk about it. Emma must have seen the look of defeat on my face because she gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "It's okay. We can always order in or something." She smiled, trying to make me feel better, but I could tell she wasn't super impressed with the situation. At that point, I was so embarrassed I could hardly look her in the eye. I had seriously messed up. Instead of a beautiful, romantic dinner, I had presented her with a chaotic disaster. I couldn't believe it, but Emma wasn't even mad. In fact, she laughed it off, saying, "Honestly, it's kind of endearing that you tried so hard." I didn't know if I should feel relieved or more embarrassed. We ended up ordering pizza, which was probably the better option anyway. It wasn't the night I had imagined, but I learned a valuable lesson. Don't try to impress someone by cooking unless you're really, really sure you know what you're doing. We still had a good time, though. We laughed at the disaster, and honestly, it was probably one of the most memorable dates we've had. I'm just grateful she didn't run screaming for the hills after seeing my complete lack of cooking skills. Moral of the story? If you're going to try and impress someone with food, at least make sure you know how to cook it first, or at least don't turn your kitchen into a war zone. TIFU by accidentally locking myself in a hotel bathroom and spending hours trying to escape, only to be rescued by a random janitor who saved the day in the most bizarre way possible. So, this happened a few months ago, and honestly, I've been too embarrassed to talk about it, but my friends are making me share it, so here it goes. I was traveling for work, staying in a nice hotel in a city I'd never been to before. The hotel was relatively fancy, a 4-star place with a sleek modern aesthetic and a bit too much emphasis on the color blue in every room. I'd been traveling for about a week at this point, and as you can imagine, I was exhausted. I hadn't had a good night's sleep since I left, mostly due to jet lag and the general misery of trying to sleep in a hotel bed that never quite feels right. So, after an afternoon of back-to-back meetings, I checked into my room and decided to treat myself. The plan was simple: take a long, hot shower, relax, and then maybe have some room service. I got into the bathroom and immediately noticed something odd. The bathroom door had this big, heavy lock on the inside. It wasn't the kind of lock you typically see on bathroom doors in most places. You know, the simple turn and lock kind? No, this was one of those old-school locks you'd expect on a vintage train or some sort of high-security building. It had a huge, brass keyhole right in the center of the door. I thought it was a bit weird, but I didn't think too much about it. After all, the hotel was fancy, and maybe they were just trying to maintain an old-timey charm. I didn't notice a key, but I figured maybe it had been removed for safety reasons, so I just let it go. Fast forward to me, in the shower, letting the hot water wash away the tension of the day. It was a good shower, so good that I completely lost track of time. I was starting to feel pretty relaxed when I decided it was time to get out. I reached for the towel, dried myself off, and proceeded to open the bathroom door. Except, the door didn't open. I jiggled the handle. Nothing. I tried to push it. Still nothing. Okay, I thought, maybe the lock is just stuck. I pulled a little harder, then a little harder again. No movement. At this point, I started to panic. I mean, I was still naked, with a towel around me, trapped in a bathroom that I couldn't open. So, I did what anyone would do when faced with an unusual situation like this. I called the front desk. Hello, this is room 508, and I'm locked in my bathroom. Could someone come and help me out? The person on the other end sounded utterly confused. Locked in your bathroom? Let me check with maintenance and I'll send someone right up. Great. So, now I was stuck waiting. But here's the thing, I wasn't just stuck in a bathroom. I was in one of those fancy, high-tech hotel bathrooms with walls made of sleek glass tiles that left me feeling like I was in a futuristic spaceship. The glass walls made the whole thing feel exposed, and there was no window. I started pacing around, trying to figure out how I could possibly escape. I considered trying to use a towel or some shampoo to somehow force the door open, not my brightest moment. But after a solid 20 minutes of absolutely ridiculous thinking, I realized that wasn't going to work. I needed to wait for maintenance, but I didn't know how long that would take. And then, as the minutes dragged on, something weird started happening. My body, still fresh from the hot shower, started to sweat in the intense heat of the bathroom. The towel started to feel uncomfortable. My mind started racing, thinking about how ridiculous it was that I couldn't even open a door. I was stuck in a hotel bathroom for no reason other than poor design, feeling like I was trapped in a never-ending loop of bad decisions. After about 30 minutes of waiting, I started banging on the door, hoping someone from the hotel would hear me. No luck. I could hear the faint sound of people walking by in the hallway, but they clearly didn't notice. I was alone. Very alone. At this point, the only thing I could do was sit down on the cold floor and wonder how the hell this happened to me. Now, at this point, I was sweating, panicking, and losing hope. I was considering calling 911, even though I knew it was just a hotel bathroom situation, when I heard a knock on the door. Hello? Maintenance here. You in there? The voice was muffled, but I was so relieved to finally hear it that I nearly shouted in joy. Yes. Yes, I'm in here. Please, help. The door swung open, and standing in the doorway was a janitor. A janitor. Not a maintenance guy, not someone from hotel security, but a janitor. He was holding a mop in one hand, a pair of rubber gloves in the other, and looked about as confused as I felt. "Hey, so, I heard you were locked in here," he asked, still holding his mop, not even taking it seriously. I was in shock. "Yes. I've been stuck in here for almost an hour. I need help." "Well, we don't usually handle this type of thing," he said, glancing around the bathroom. "But I can give it a shot." And then, in the most bizarre turn of events, this janitor actually looked around, grabbed a nearby cleaning tool, and somehow managed to disengage the lock. It wasn't anything spectacular, just a simple twist of a weird mechanism, but it was one of the most surreal moments of my life. The janitor gave me a wide grin and said, "There you go, buddy. You're free to go. Just, maybe avoid locking that next time?" I didn't know whether to hug him or laugh, but honestly, I was so relieved I almost cried. The janitor gave me a half-hearted salute and then shuffled away with his mop, leaving me standing in my hotel bathroom, now free, fully clothed, and completely embarrassed. And that's how I got locked in a hotel bathroom for hours, only to be saved by a janitor, of all people. To this day, I still wonder how he knew exactly how to open the lock. But maybe I'll never know. I just hope I never experience anything like that again. Now, whenever I'm in a hotel room, I make sure to check the locks. And yes, I still tip that janitor whenever I stay at that hotel. He earned it. End of story. I recently made a huge mistake that, in hindsight, feels like something straight out of a sitcom. It all started a couple of weeks ago when I decided to spend some time working from home. It was one of those days where everything felt like it was going to go smoothly, but, as usual, my own well-intentioned decisions decided to turn against me. So, a little background. I'm a 32-year-old guy living in a small apartment with my girlfriend, Jess. We've been together for about 3 years, and we've had our fair share of ups and downs. For the most part, we've been pretty happy, but every now and then, little things will happen that'll test our patience with each other. For example, Jess has a peculiar habit of buying way more groceries than we need, especially when it comes to snacks. Seriously, our pantry is like a shrine to potato chips and cookies. Don't get me wrong, I love snacks, but she always goes overboard. Anyway, it was a Wednesday afternoon, and I had a few deadlines for work that I was trying to meet. I decided to skip the office for the day, set up shop on the couch with my laptop, and plow through my tasks. Jess had gone out to run some errands, so I figured I could focus and make some serious headway. But, as the day went on, something strange started happening. I felt a bit off. Not physically, but mentally. It was as if my brain just wasn't firing on all cylinders. I couldn't concentrate. I kept opening and closing tabs on my browser, jumping between tasks without completing any of them. My thoughts were everywhere. And then I realized what it was. I hadn't eaten anything substantial since breakfast, and it was almost 3 p.m. So, I got up from the couch, walked into the kitchen, and started looking around. Now, our kitchen is small, and I had already grown tired of most of the snacks Jess bought. I didn't want any more chips or cookies. I wanted something real to eat. That's when I spotted it, a box of frozen pizza in the back of the freezer. It was one of those cheap ones, no brand, just a plain, generic pizza that costs a few bucks. But, to be honest, it didn't matter what kind of pizza it was. The fact that it was sitting there, ready to be cooked, was enough for me. I took the box out and tossed it on the counter. It had been a while since I'd had a frozen pizza, and I was looking forward to it. I preheated the oven, followed the instructions on the box, and popped the pizza in. As I was waiting, I got distracted by my laptop again. I checked a couple of emails, responded to a few messages, and before I knew it, the smell of burning started to fill the apartment. Panic set in. I sprinted to the kitchen, heart racing, and pulled the pizza out of the oven. The entire thing was charred beyond recognition. It looked like it had been hit with a flamethrower. It was blackened and completely inedible. I stared at it for a moment, completely defeated. How did I mess up a frozen pizza? I had followed the instructions to the letter, or so I thought. I didn't want to waste it, though. I hate wasting food, and something inside me just snapped. I decided that I'd salvage what I could. I grabbed a knife and started scraping off the burnt bits, hoping to find something edible underneath. The pizza was so far gone that I had to take off nearly the entire top layer. I was left with a sad, rubbery base that had a faint taste of burnt cardboard. It was a disaster. Just as I was about to give up and throw the whole thing away, the front door swung open, and Jess walked in. She had a bag full of groceries in one hand, her purse in the other, and she froze when she saw me standing there with the ruined pizza in front of me. "What happened?" she asked, eyebrows raised. Is that the pizza you made?" I couldn't help but feel embarrassed. "Yeah. I tried to cook it, but I got distracted. It's burnt beyond repair." Jess stared at it for a moment, then burst out laughing. "Oh my God, what did you do to it?" "I don't know," I said, almost pleading. "I followed the instructions, but I guess I wasn't paying enough attention." Jess walked over to the counter, still chuckling. "You know, you can't just leave a frozen pizza in the oven for an hour and expect it to come out okay, right?" My eyes widened. "Wait, what?" She grinned. "Yeah, you probably left it in there for like an hour. The instructions are for like 15 minutes or something. You basically roasted the pizza." I couldn't believe it. I had gotten so caught up in work and just completely lost track of time. I had indeed left the pizza in the oven for about an hour, thinking I was just following the instructions like any normal person would. I had no idea how it had even gone that far. "Well, that explains a lot," I said, trying to laugh it off, though I was still mortified. Jess shook her head, still laughing. "Honestly, I don't even know how you managed to burn it that badly. It's like you tried to bake it into a brick." At this point, I had no choice but to laugh along with her. There wasn't much else I could do. Jess threw the ruined pizza in the trash and got to work on making something else for dinner. I tried to help, but I was still too embarrassed to be much assistance. The worst part of all this, though, came later that evening. After dinner, Jess and I were sitting on the couch, watching a show. We were laughing about the pizza disaster, and I thought everything had calmed down. Then, Jess got a text. It was from her best friend, Mandy, who had been asking how things were going with me and Jess. Jess replied with some general updates, and then Mandy asked, "So, how's your boyfriend doing with the cooking? Still burning everything?" Jess took a screenshot of the message and sent it to me. I looked at the screen, my face going red again. Apparently, Jess had already shared the story of my pizza fail with her friends, and now, I was known among their group as the guy who burned a frozen pizza beyond recognition. I wasn't even mad at Jess, honestly. I probably would have done the same thing in her position, but the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Not only had I messed up the pizza, but now, I was the punchline of a joke. That night, I vowed never to attempt cooking when Jess wasn't around again. I've always known that I'm not the best in the kitchen, but this experience was humbling to say the least. Maybe one day I'll live it down, but for now, I'm the guy who burnt a frozen pizza so badly it could have been used as a weapon. So, yeah. That's my TIFU story. Hopefully, you all get a good laugh at my expense. But please, learn from my mistake, never leave a frozen pizza in the oven for an hour. It's a lesson I'll never forget. TIFU by attempting to impress my date with my cooking skills, but instead, I nearly set my apartment on fire and almost got kicked out of my building. A little context first, I'm in my late 20s, and I've been dating this girl, Emily, for about 2 months. Things have been going great, really great, actually. We've been going on cute dates, having long conversations about life, sharing playlists, and even making each other laugh about dumb memes. She's smart, funny, beautiful, and has this calm, gentle vibe that makes you want to be a better person just by being around her. Honestly, I felt lucky. At this point in the relationship, I wanted to do something special. We'd been out to restaurants a few times, but I figured, hey, I could cook for her. Show her that I'm not just a guy who can order takeout. I thought this was a great idea. After all, how hard could it be to make a nice meal at home? I'd done it before. I was no Gordon Ramsay, but I had some cooking basics under my belt. Pasta? No problem. Salad? Easy. But this time, I was aiming for something a bit more ambitious: homemade chicken Alfredo with a side of garlic bread. It was a pretty safe choice, but definitely more impressive than slapping together a sandwich. I spent the entire day preparing. I was going all out: grocery store runs, chopping vegetables, even watching YouTube tutorials to make sure my sauce was creamy and smooth. I was feeling like a chef, confident that this meal would be the key to impressing Emily. The first part of the evening went smoothly. I set up my apartment nicely, dimmed the lights, put on some soft music, and even lit a few candles. I may have gotten a little carried away with the ambience. When Emily arrived, she looked as gorgeous as ever, and I was excited to show off my hard work. We had a glass of wine as we chatted, and everything seemed to be going perfectly. The table was set, the food was nearly ready, and I was feeling good about how the night was going. Then came the chicken. Now, here's where things started to go sideways. I had this plan to pan-sear the chicken breasts to golden perfection, then finish them off in the oven. I was excited to get that perfect sear, the crispy, golden brown crust that would make everything look like it came from a 5-star restaurant. What I didn't plan for, however, was that the pan I was using was way too hot. I mean, way too hot. I was cooking the chicken on high heat, thinking it would get done quickly, but it wasn't just browning, it was burning. The smell of charred meat filled the room, and I could see smoke starting to rise from the pan. I panicked for a second, thinking, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I can salvage it. But no, the chicken was getting worse by the second. I threw the pan in the sink to cool off, hoping the smell would dissipate, but it didn't. It was everywhere. And Emily, being the nice person she is, was trying to pretend she didn't notice, but I could see her wrinkling her nose slightly. I had to salvage the meal somehow, so I threw in a new batch of chicken, but I was already flustered. In my panic, I completely forgot about the garlic bread in the oven. At this point, I had my hands full with trying to fix the chicken disaster, and I didn't even hear the timer go off for the bread. By the time I finally got the chicken right, mostly, the garlic bread was burnt to a crisp. The bread had gone from golden brown perfection to a dark, unrecognizable mess. I tried to scrape off the worst parts, but it was no use. It was hard and charred, like a piece of charcoal. So now I had burnt chicken, burnt bread, and my pride in the gutter. I was so caught up in my failure that I didn't realize something even worse was happening. Smoke was still wafting through the apartment, and the smoke detector went off. The shrill, piercing alarm cut through the silence, making my heart race. I grabbed a towel and tried to wave it around, but it was no use. The smoke was thick, and I was having trouble breathing. The worst part? Emily was trying to stay calm, but I could see her panic as well. "Is there a fire?" she asked, eyes wide. I rushed to the window and opened it to get some airflow, but in the process, I knocked over a glass of wine that spilled all over the table, the floor, and even onto my favorite couch. It was a total disaster. "Maybe we should go outside," Emily suggested, trying to stay calm but looking visibly concerned. I nodded, and we stumbled out into the hallway. At this point, the smoke detector was still blaring, and I had no idea how to make it stop. I had hoped that opening the window would clear things up, but it was too late. The fire department had already been called. I could hear the sirens approaching, and I had to face the reality that I had created an utter disaster in my own home. We stepped into the hallway just as the fire truck pulled up outside. I had to explain to the firemen that there was no actual fire, just an overzealous cook and some very burnt food. They weren't exactly thrilled to be there over a kitchen mishap, but they were professional and reassuring. One of the firefighters even gave me a pat on the back and said, "Hey, man, we've all been there." But I could tell they were silently judging me for the smoke and the drama I'd caused. As the firemen left and the alarms finally turned off, Emily and I stood there in the hallway, feeling embarrassed and awkward. The evening I had planned, romantic dinner, fancy homemade meal, and perfect ambience, had turned into a full-blown fiasco. "Are you okay?" Emily asked me, her tone surprisingly calm, though she was clearly trying not to laugh at the absurdity of the situation. I didn't know how to respond. I was mortified. "Yeah, I'm really sorry," I muttered, feeling like the biggest idiot. Emily smiled gently and said, "It's okay. It's kind of funny, actually." I couldn't help but chuckle at how ridiculous everything had become. In the end, we ended up ordering pizza and sitting on the fire escape, eating our dinner with a view of the city and laughing about the disaster that had unfolded in my apartment. The evening didn't go as planned, but it was memorable in a way I hadn't expected. I learned that sometimes the best moments don't come from perfection, they come from how you handle the messes life throws at you. So, to recap, I tried to impress my date with a home-cooked meal, but instead, I nearly set my apartment on fire, ruined the dinner, and got the fire department involved. Emily didn't run for the hills though, she stayed, and we had a good time despite the chaos. At least we got a good story out of it. But next time, I'm sticking to takeout. So, this happened last weekend, and I still can't believe I'm sharing it, but I need to get it off my chest because it's one of those "what the hell was I thinking" moments that just keeps replaying in my head. I'm pretty sure my friends will never let me live it down. I live in a small town, and in this town, everyone knows everyone. It's one of those places where if you sneeze at the grocery store, people will know what color your socks are. My friend group is tight-knit, and we usually hang out on the weekends, going to local pubs, watching sports, or just hanging out at someone's house. We're all in our late 20s, but still like to party like we're in college. This particular weekend, one of my friends, let's call him Dan, invited us to his place for a low-key get-together. I've known Dan for years, and while he's a good guy, he has a tendency to exaggerate. When he said low-key, I should have known better. But of course, I went anyway. I show up, and immediately, I realize something's off. The lights are dimmed, there's music playing, and I smell the distinct odor of, is that weed? And alcohol? Well, guess what? Apparently, low-key in Dan's world means everyone get hammered and do some stupid shit. I'm talking shots of tequila, joints being passed around like candy, and Dan, who's definitely a bit too excited for the night, telling everyone to just relax and let loose. I didn't intend to drink much. I had a long week, and I was planning to be the responsible one for once. But as you can probably guess, that didn't last long. Dan's girlfriend, let's call her Sarah, starts putting together this huge bowl of punch. And not just any punch, it was a homemade concoction that looked like it could either be a delicious fruity drink or an absolute disaster. Either way, it was strong. After a few shots of tequila, I figured, what's the harm in trying it? Big mistake. Big mistake. The punch hit me hard. I mean, I thought I could handle my liquor, but this thing was like drinking pure regret. 1 minute, I'm sipping from the cup, and the next, I feel like the room is spinning. It wasn't long before I found myself in full-on party mode. I was dancing, or attempting to, it was probably more like stumbling, laughing, and having a great time. And naturally, I started getting more chatty. Too chatty. Dan's roommate, Alex, was there too. I don't really know him that well, but he's a decent guy. At some point during the evening, we started talking about, I don't even know what. Probably something stupid. But somehow, I ended up talking about my ex. You know how sometimes, when you're drunk, your brain decides to spill every embarrassing thought you've had over the last 10 years? Yeah, that's what happened. I went on this long tangent about how my ex and I broke up because of some dumb argument over a trip we had planned to Cancun. It wasn't even a big deal, but in my intoxicated state, I convinced myself it was the most significant breakup of all time. At some point, I realized that Alex was giving me this confused look, but I didn't stop. I was fully committed to this emotional ramble. He nodded along awkwardly, and I just kept going. Now, fast forward to about an hour later. The party is in full swing. The punch is flowing, the music is loud, and there's this weird vibe in the air, like everyone's pretending to be having a great time, but I can tell some people are over it. I go to grab another drink, but I bump into Sarah. She's standing there with her arms crossed, looking at me like I've just insulted her favorite pet. And then, it clicks. She says, "Did you tell Alex about your ex?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So what? I didn't really go into detail, did I? Sarah's face drops. You told Alex that your ex was the reason you and I broke up, didn't you? I froze. Wait, what? She goes on to explain that for the past couple of weeks, she and Alex have been getting really close. Like, way too close. So close that it started becoming a problem. I didn't even know this, but apparently, there had been some weird tension between the two of them that had been building up for a while. So, when I casually mentioned my ex, it was like opening a floodgate of awkwardness. Apparently, my drunken rambling about how my ex ruined everything was taken as me blaming her for things going south between them. I tried to explain that it was all just drunken rambling, but by now, the damage was done. Sarah was furious, and Alex looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear. The room was getting uncomfortable, and I suddenly realized that I was the reason for the tension. I had unintentionally thrown them under the bus. Sarah stormed off, and Alex looked at me like he wanted to strangle me. I was mortified. Here I was, thinking I was just having a good time, and instead, I'd caused a complete meltdown between two people who had their own issues. It didn't end there, though. At some point, I got it into my head that I should go after Sarah and apologize. So, I left the party and tried to find her. I wasn't sure where she had gone, but I figured I would walk around the neighborhood a bit and hope to stumble into her. I was still pretty buzzed and clearly not thinking straight. After what felt like forever, I finally found her sitting on the front steps of a nearby house. She was crying, which made me feel even worse. I sat down next to her and tried to apologize, but my speech was all over the place. It came out like a jumbled mess, and all I could do was make things worse. Eventually, she told me to leave her alone, and I did. I went back to Dan's place, but the party had pretty much disbanded by then. Everyone had either left or was sulking in corners, nursing their drinks. I was the last one standing, feeling like an absolute wreck. In the end, the fallout from the night was worse than the hangover. Dan and Sarah stopped talking for a few days. Alex distanced himself from the group. And I? Well, I became the subject of jokes for weeks. Every time something went wrong at another hangout, someone would inevitably say, "At least it's not as bad as what OP did last weekend." It was like I had become a cautionary tale. The worst part is that I never got to properly apologize to either Sarah or Alex. I tried texting, but they both ignored me. I feel like I'll always be the guy who ruined a good friendship just because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I guess the lesson here is to never drink homemade punch at a party, never ramble about your ex while drunk, and for God's sake, never drink and talk at the same time. TIFU. TIFU by attempting to cook dinner for my girlfriend and accidentally setting the kitchen on fire. So, I've been dating my girlfriend Emma for about 6 months now, and everything's been going great. We met at a mutual friend's party, hit it off right away, and have been inseparable since. But like any relationship, there's the whole getting to know each other's quirks phase. For example, I learned very quickly that Emma is a huge foodie. She loves cooking, loves experimenting with different cuisines, and knows more about herbs and spices than I thought was possible. Her Instagram is basically a shrine to gourmet meals, and she's always trying new recipes. I, on the other hand, am about as capable in the kitchen as a toddler with a plastic spoon. I've tried to get better, especially since Emma keeps telling me how much she loves it when I cook for her. She doesn't ask for anything extravagant, she just likes a nice, home-cooked meal. So, for the past few weeks, I've been practicing. I've made spaghetti a few times, scrambled eggs, and even tried my hand at a chicken stir-fry once. Honestly, I don't think I've ever been more proud of myself than when I didn't burn the stir-fry. Last week, Emma mentioned how much she loved homemade pizza, and I thought to myself, okay, this is it. This is the perfect opportunity to impress her. I decided that I was going to make her a pizza from scratch. I watched a couple of YouTube videos, researched the best dough recipe, and bought all the ingredients. This was going to be my moment to shine. The day of the big dinner, I texted her during the afternoon, "Hey, I'm making dinner tonight. Can't wait for you to try it." She was super excited and gave me a bunch of heart emojis, and I felt good about it. I was on top of the world, really. The first step was making the dough. I got all the ingredients ready: flour, yeast, olive oil, sugar, and warm water, and mixed it together. I followed the recipe exactly, even though I was starting to get nervous because, well, things tend to go wrong in my kitchen. But everything seemed to be going well. I kneaded the dough, covered it, and left it to rise. Then I started prepping the toppings: pepperoni, mushrooms, mozzarella, and some fresh basil, because Emma's all about fresh ingredients. About an hour later, the dough had risen perfectly. I was feeling pretty good about this, so I preheated the oven to 475 degrees Fahrenheit, as the recipe instructed. I was going to bake this pizza on a stone, but I didn't have one, so I just used a baking sheet, hoping it would work just as well. Now, here's where things start to go downhill. The dough was sticky. I had a hell of a time trying to stretch it out without it sticking to my hands or the counter. I tried to flour the surface, but it wasn't working. I was sweating and cursing under my breath, but I was determined to push through. After about 20 minutes of struggling, I finally got the dough stretched out to what I thought was the right size. I slid it onto the baking sheet and started adding the toppings, layering the cheese, pepperoni, mushrooms, and a sprinkle of basil. At this point, I was feeling more confident. I slid the baking sheet into the oven, set a timer for 10 minutes, and washed my hands, thinking, I've got this. I went to sit on the couch, waiting for the timer to go off. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through Instagram, and texted Emma, telling her how amazing the pizza was going to be. But as I was scrolling, I started to smell something burning. Uh-oh, I thought. Maybe I left it in too long. I immediately ran to the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. The pizza was on fire. Not just a little fire. This was a full-on, out-of-control blaze. The crust had caught fire, and the flames were licking up the sides of the oven. I stood there for a second, frozen, thinking that this was some sort of bad joke. How did it get this bad? I immediately grabbed the oven mitts and opened the oven door, but the flames grew higher, and I realized that there was no way I was going to get this pizza out safely. Panicked, I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, which happened to be a dish towel. I tried to use it to smother the fire, but that only made it worse. The towel caught fire too. So now, not only was my pizza on fire, but I was holding a flaming dish towel in my hand. My heart was racing. I couldn't think straight. I looked around for something to put the fire out, and that's when I remembered the fire extinguisher. I had no idea where it was, but I was pretty sure it was under the sink. I sprinted to the sink, grabbed the fire extinguisher, and rushed back to the oven. But the fire was still growing. I didn't know what I was doing at this point. I was shaking so much I could barely hold the fire extinguisher properly. I pulled the pin and tried to aim it at the flames, but the nozzle was spraying all over the place. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I managed to direct the extinguisher at the fire, and it went out. The kitchen was covered in a fine, white powder, and the smell of burnt pizza filled the air. I stood there, in shock, staring at the oven. The pizza was a charred, blackened mess, and the baking sheet was warped. I couldn't even believe it. How had I let this happen? I had literally set my kitchen on fire. I quickly opened the windows to let the smoke out and turned on the kitchen fan. I texted Emma, apologizing for the disaster, but I was too embarrassed to tell her the full story. Instead, I just said, "So, about that pizza. I think it might be a little overcooked." She texted back with a string of laughing emojis, asking me what happened. I told her I'd messed up, and we should just order takeout instead. She insisted on coming over immediately to help me clean up the mess, but when she arrived, she couldn't stop laughing. At first, I was mortified, but then I realized it was kind of funny. Sure, my attempt to cook had turned into an inferno, but Emma didn't mind. She thought it was hilarious, and we ended up ordering pizza from her favorite place instead. In the end, I learned a valuable lesson: I'm not ready to make pizza from scratch. But Emma? She was still impressed by my effort, and we had a great evening together, even if my kitchen nearly burned down. So yeah, TIFU by setting my kitchen on fire while trying to impress my girlfriend with a homemade pizza. TIFU by accidentally causing a massive chain of events that nearly ruined my best friend's wedding. So, let's backtrack to a few months ago when my best friend, Emily, asked me to be her maid of honor. I was over the moon. I've known Emily since we were both kids. We've gone through everything together: school, crushes, breakups, family drama, you name it. I was honored that she wanted me to play such an important role in her big day. The wedding planning process was, to put it mildly, stressful. Emily, like many brides, had a very clear vision of how everything should go. There were endless meetings about floral arrangements, caterers, venue options, and dress fittings. I was tasked with organizing the bridal shower, handling some of the logistics, and being her emotional support through it all. Not that I was complaining, I was excited to help. The wedding day arrived, and I was buzzing with excitement. Everything had been meticulously planned for months. We were at the venue hours before the ceremony, and Emily was calm, cool, and collected. But of course, there were a few last-minute things to take care of. The photographer was running a bit behind, the hairstylist was still finishing up some final touches on the bridesmaids, and I was running around making sure everyone was in place. Then it happened. The thing that would change the course of the entire day. I'm not proud of this, but here it goes: I accidentally deleted the entire wedding playlist. Here's the full story. A few days before the wedding, Emily had sent me a shared file with all of the music she had chosen for the ceremony, reception, and even the dance floor. She trusted me to ensure that everything was set up properly with the venue's sound system. Now, I'm no expert when it comes to tech stuff, but I thought it would be fine to just upload the playlist to the system the day of the event. I showed up early, about 4 hours before the ceremony, to get everything sorted. I was informed that the venue's tech guy had a specific setup for playlists and that I needed to upload everything onto his laptop. Easy enough, right? I figured I could just double-check the songs, make sure they were in the correct order, and then go back to checking in on Emily. Unfortunately, the tech guy had one of those old-school laptops that still had everything sorted in folders, subfolders, and sub-subfolders. At this point, I was already stressed out and feeling a bit out of my depth. I didn't know how to navigate his system properly, so I tried to make it easy on myself by dragging the playlist file into one of the subfolders. Instead of clicking open, I mistakenly hit delete. I didn't realize my mistake until I looked up and saw the "Are you sure you want to permanently delete this file?" prompt on the screen. I froze. My brain immediately went into overdrive. Did I click the wrong thing? Was that the file? Did it really just disappear? In a panic, I clicked the first option that came to mind, cancel. But it didn't work. I had already pressed the wrong button, and just like that, the playlist was gone. Poof. All of Emily's music, the songs that were meant to guide her down the aisle, the ones that were going to play while we ate cake, and the ones for the first dance, vanished. I stared at the screen in horror. I had no idea what to do. My first instinct was to grab the file from the cloud backup, but I quickly realized that Emily hadn't uploaded the playlist there. She had shared it with me via email, and I hadn't thought to back it up in a different place. I couldn't call her because she was getting ready for the ceremony, and I certainly couldn't tell her before she walked down the aisle. I made the only decision I could think of. I quickly texted the other bridesmaids to let them know about the situation and to ask if any of them had the playlist saved to their phones. No one responded. I checked the tech guy's computer again, hoping for some miracle, but it was hopeless. I couldn't find any backups, nothing. The more I stared at the screen, the worse I felt. At this point, I was officially panicking. I had just a little over an hour before the ceremony was supposed to start. I was running out of time. In a last-ditch effort, I contacted the venue's DJ to see if he had any of the music saved. Fortunately, he did have a few of the songs Emily wanted, just not the entire playlist. I tried to stall, telling him that we were just running a little behind and to wait until the last minute to start. I didn't want anyone to know about the disaster I had just caused. Then, I tried to fill in the gaps. I grabbed my own phone and started downloading random wedding songs I thought might work in place of the missing ones. I knew Emily had a very specific vibe in mind, so I wasn't sure how well these random tunes would go over. They were definitely not part of the plan, but it was all I could do at that point. Fast forward to the ceremony. Emily had no idea what had happened, but as soon as the music started playing, she gave me this look. It wasn't an angry look, it was more of a confused one. The music was off. The tempo was wrong. There was no smooth transition from one song to the next. The bridal march was supposed to be soft and slow, but instead, it sounded like an upbeat pop song from the early 2000s. The guests didn't seem to notice, but I was sweating bullets. Then came the worst part. The song for the father-daughter dance was missing. I had to improvise. In a moment of sheer panic, I grabbed my phone, opened Spotify, and started playing a random instrumental song I thought might fit. It didn't. I could see Emily's dad staring at me, wondering what the hell was going on. Emily just smiled through it, but I could tell she was silently losing her mind. The rest of the night went on like this. I had to keep running to the DJ, asking him to improvise with songs that barely fit the occasion. The reception was a disaster musically. The party vibe was awkward because none of the songs that Emily had carefully curated played when they were supposed to. I was mortified. After the wedding, Emily came to me and asked what had happened with the music. I apologized profusely and told her the truth. She was upset, but she also kind of laughed it off. Her words were something like, "Well, it wasn't my dream wedding without a little disaster, I guess." It wasn't until months later that Emily told me she almost didn't invite me to her wedding because of all the stress I'd been under. Apparently, she was worried that I would let something go wrong like this. I couldn't believe it, but at least she didn't hold a grudge. So yeah, TIFU by deleting my best friend's entire wedding playlist, resulting in a chaotic, semi-embarrassing wedding reception. But hey, at least it was memorable, right? Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a perfect dinner and accidentally burning down my apartment complex. So, I've always been the kind of person who likes to think of myself as a chef in the kitchen, or at least someone who can pull off a decent meal. I'd been talking to this girl I've been into for a while, let's call her Sarah. She's amazing, smart, funny, and incredibly sweet, and I've been trying to find a way to impress her without coming off as desperate. After a few weeks of casual texting, we finally agreed to hang out at my place. Now, I could have taken her to a nice restaurant or something, but I figured, why not make dinner at my apartment? It's intimate, it shows I'm trying, and hey, I've been watching cooking videos on YouTube, so I thought I was pretty much a pro. Plus, there's something romantic about homemade food, right? So, I decided to cook her a 3-course meal, an appetizer, a main dish, and dessert. I had all the ingredients and a game plan. What could go wrong? It all started with the appetizer. I'd chosen bruschetta, an easy and fresh dish. Tomatoes, basil, garlic, a little balsamic vinegar, nothing too complicated. I was feeling confident, maybe too confident, because I didn't even think to Google a specific recipe. I just threw the ingredients together, toasted the bread, and went to set it aside for later. Next up was the main course, a classic chicken Alfredo. Easy, right? Boil the pasta, cook the chicken, and mix the sauce. I pulled out my ingredients, seasoned the chicken, and threw it in the pan to sear. Here's where the first mistake happened. I didn't realize I was using a non-stick pan, and I'd cranked the heat up to the max because I was impatient. I was also not paying attention to the fact that the oil in the pan was splattering and starting to burn. Meanwhile, I started boiling the water for the pasta and grabbed a bottle of white wine to open. This is where the kitchen started to look like a chaotic mess. I was trying to do too many things at once, stirring the pasta, flipping the chicken, and pouring myself a glass of wine, for cooking purposes, of course. I even managed to spill a little wine on the counter, but I wasn't too worried. Everything was still under control. That is, until the smoke started to rise. I looked over at the pan, and the chicken was blackened. I quickly tried to salvage it by flipping it over, but it was no use. The skin had turned into something resembling charcoal. I couldn't serve that, obviously. I thought maybe I could cut off the burnt bits and pass it off as crispy, but then the pan started to emit more smoke. I looked down, and that's when I realized the oil was burning like crazy, and the smoke detectors were about to go off. I rushed to turn the heat down, but my apartment was already starting to fill with smoke. I grabbed a towel and started fanning the smoke detectors, but no luck. The high-pitched screech of the alarm filled the apartment. I panicked. I opened all the windows, trying to let the smoke out, but it wasn't working. The alarm kept blaring, and I'm thinking, Sarah is going to hear this. She's going to think I'm a total idiot. I quickly ran to the door, trying to open it and get the smoke out, but at this point, the smoke had already started to spread into the hallway. I opened the door, and all I could hear was a loud shh from the hallway. Not the sound you want to hear when you're already in damage control mode. I looked up and saw my neighbors standing outside their apartments, looking confused and concerned. Then, from around the corner, one of my neighbors, let's call him Greg, comes walking over. He's this big guy who's always walking around in a bathrobe, even at 5 p.m., and he's got this gruff demeanor. He takes one look at me and the cloud of smoke, then gives me a deadpan look. Do you need help with that? He asks, pointing to the smoke detector. At this point, I'm practically sweating bullets. Yeah, I managed to squeak out. I think it's fine. It's just the kitchen. It'll clear up. Craig just stares at me. He says, not convinced. He walks past me into the hallway, directly towards the fire exit, and pulls the emergency alarm. I stare in horror as the fire alarm goes off. It's now no longer just the smoke detectors in my apartment, but the entire building. I hear the shrill noise echoing down the hall, and my heart sinks. This isn't just a dinner disaster anymore. This is a full-scale emergency. I hear people starting to yell, and I realize people are evacuating. Panic sets in. I try to open the window more, hoping the smoke will clear, but it's not enough. I hear the sound of sirens in the distance. The fire department is coming. At this point, I'm standing there, surrounded by smoke, with no idea how to fix it. I can hear Sarah texting me, asking if I'm okay, but I'm too embarrassed to even look at my phone. She's probably thinking this is the most ridiculous thing ever. The fire trucks arrive, and I'm in full crisis mode. I run down the hallway to meet them, still in my apron, and try to explain what happened. The firemen are super calm, but I can tell they're trying not to laugh. They walk into my apartment, assess the situation, and then give me the "it could have been worse" speech. The worst part is, now that the fire trucks are here, all of my neighbors are standing outside in their pajamas, looking at me like I'm some kind of fire hazard. After what feels like an eternity, the firemen clear the scene, and my neighbors go back inside, giving me the occasional side eye. I'm left standing in the hallway, utterly mortified. I quickly text Sarah, apologizing for the complete disaster of a date. She responds a few minutes later. It's okay. I was actually kind of impressed that you tried to cook for me. I mean, I've never had anyone nearly burn down their apartment just for me before. It's definitely a story. And that's how my attempt to impress a girl turned into me nearly burning down the entire building. I did end up paying for the fire department's service call, thankfully. The damage was mostly smoke-related, and I had to deal with some awkward encounters with my neighbors for weeks afterward. So yeah, I definitely learned my lesson. The next time I try to impress someone, I think I'll just order takeout. TLDR, tried to cook a fancy dinner to impress my crush, accidentally set off the fire alarm, nearly burned down my apartment complex, and ended up embarrassing myself in front of my neighbors and the fire department. But Sarah thought it was funny, so there's that. TIFU by trying to surprise my girlfriend with a homemade anniversary dinner and ending up with a 911 call, the fire department, and an emergency room visit. I've always been the kind of guy who loves a good challenge. My girlfriend and I have been together for almost 2 years now, and things have been going pretty great. Our anniversary was coming up, and I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to do something special for her. I've heard about these grand, romantic gestures where someone cooks a fancy dinner at home, candles, music, all that good stuff. So, naturally, I decided that's exactly what I was going to do. I've cooked before, but only simple stuff like pasta, burgers, and occasionally eggs. However, I thought to myself, I can totally do this. How hard can it be to make a fancy meal? I've got the internet. So, I googled romantic anniversary dinner ideas and found a recipe for steak, mashed potatoes, and some kind of gourmet salad with a balsamic glaze. It sounded fancy, and the reviews were all positive, so I went for it. I spent the entire day running around town to gather all the ingredients. I wasn't going to just grab stuff from the local supermarket either. I went all out, hitting up multiple stores to get the freshest, most high-end ingredients I could find. I even splurged on a bottle of wine that cost more than I usually spend on an entire week's worth of groceries. I was determined to make this dinner perfect. The plan was to cook everything while she was at work, so when she came home, it would be all set up and ready to go. I figured it would take a few hours, so I had plenty of time to get everything in place. I was feeling pretty confident, after all. How hard could it be to cook a fancy meal, right? Well, this is where things started to go downhill. I began with the mashed potatoes, something I figured would be easy. I boiled them, mashed them with some butter and cream, and added a little bit of garlic. Simple enough. Then, I moved on to the steak. I read that searing the steak at a high temperature was important for getting that crispy, flavorful exterior, so I turned the stove up to what I thought was a reasonable heat and threw the steaks in the pan. That's when I started to smell something burning. I thought it was just the garlic from the potatoes, but when I looked down, I saw smoke coming from the pan. Panic set in, and I immediately grabbed the steaks and put them on a plate. But as I turned to check the pan, I saw the entire bottom of it was covered in flames. In my rush to handle the situation, I knocked the bottle of olive oil over, and it spilled all over the stove. The flames grew bigger. The pan was now on fire, and I was officially in over my head. At first, I did what every person who's never been trained in fire safety does. I freaked out. I started flailing around the kitchen, looking for anything to put the fire out. I grabbed a dish towel and tried to smother the flames. Of course, this made it worse. The fire started spreading up the sides of the stove, and I could feel the heat increasing. I quickly realized that trying to put the fire out myself was a terrible idea, so I ran to the phone and called 911. I've never felt more like an idiot in my life as I explained to the dispatcher that I had started a small fire in my kitchen while cooking. She was calm, but the fire was getting bigger, and I was starting to get a little more frantic. "Stay calm," the dispatcher told me. "Do you have a fire extinguisher?" I had no idea where one was. I lived in an apartment, and I was pretty sure there was one somewhere, but I had never thought to look for it. I said no, which immediately made the dispatcher tell me to evacuate the apartment. I grabbed my phone, wallet, and keys, and I bolted out of the kitchen, leaving the apartment. I stood outside, waiting for the fire department to show up, while the flames continued to rage inside. It felt like forever, but the fire department finally arrived about 10 minutes later. They rushed in with their gear, and I had to stand there feeling like the biggest failure on the planet. Within minutes, they had the fire under control, but they informed me that it had done some serious damage. The stovetop was completely charred, the cabinets were singed, and there was smoke damage all throughout the kitchen. To make matters worse, I realized that I still hadn't called my girlfriend to let her know what had happened. I had been so panicked that I hadn't thought to warn her that our apartment was about to be a total loss. She was about to head home, and I knew she'd be really worried when she saw the fire trucks outside. I called her, and she picked up immediately. "Hey, what's going on? I see all the fire trucks outside." Funny story. I was trying to cook us an anniversary dinner, and things got a little out of hand. There was a pause, followed by a nervous laugh. "Are you serious? You almost burned the place down?" "Yeah," I said, trying not to sound like a complete idiot. "I'm really sorry, but I don't think we're having dinner here tonight." She was surprisingly calm about it. "Are you okay? Is everything okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. The fire department is here, but everything's under control." She sighed in relief. "I can't believe you tried to surprise me with a fancy dinner and ended up nearly burning the place down. I love you, but maybe next time, just stick to takeout?" I could hear the humor in her voice, and even though I was embarrassed beyond belief, I couldn't help but laugh a little myself. As it turned out, the fire department said that it was lucky I had called them when I did. The flames had started to spread to the cabinets, and if I hadn't gotten out of the apartment when I did, the damage could have been much worse. The next day, I had to take a trip to the emergency room. Apparently, I had inhaled enough smoke during my panicked kitchen fiasco that it was a good idea to get checked out. Thankfully, nothing serious, just some smoke inhalation, but it felt like the cherry on top of my disaster. In the end, we spent our anniversary at a local restaurant. It wasn't quite the romantic evening I had envisioned, but we did have a good laugh about it later, and it was a reminder that sometimes the best surprises are the ones that go totally wrong. As for cooking, I'm sticking to simpler meals for a while. Maybe a nice salad and some pasta, nothing that could possibly set off a fire alarm again. Lesson learned: surprises are great, but maybe don't try to cook a gourmet meal unless you really know what you're doing. And definitely check for a fire extinguisher before lighting up the stove. So, this all started when I decided to invite some friends over for a small gathering at my place. It had been a while since we'd all hung out, and I figured it'd be a good chance to reconnect, catch up, and maybe do something fun. Little did I know, this decision would lead to one of the most awkward and embarrassing experiences of my life. I'd been planning the gathering for a couple of weeks. I invited a few close friends, including my best friend Sarah, who I've known since childhood, and a couple of newer friends from work. Everyone seemed excited, and I spent a fair amount of time getting everything ready. I had ordered a bunch of food, stocked up on drinks, and even curated a playlist of songs that would hopefully keep the vibe fun. The plan was simple: eat, drink, play a few party games, and just enjoy the evening. As the time for the gathering drew closer, I started to feel more nervous. I'm not exactly the best host, and social situations can sometimes feel a bit overwhelming for me. But I figured it would be fine. After all, these were my friends, and they wouldn't judge me for being a little awkward, right? Around 7 p.m., people started arriving. Sarah was the first to show up, and we immediately slipped into our usual banter, which calmed my nerves. A few minutes later, the others arrived, and we all gathered in the living room. I was feeling pretty good at this point. Everyone was mingling, chatting, and laughing. We grabbed drinks and began to play some of the games I had planned, and everything was going smoothly. However, things started to take a weird turn when my work colleague, Mike, asked me if I had any strange snacks or food. I had gone for the usual finger foods, chips, salsa, mini sliders, but I guess that wasn't adventurous enough for Mike. He seemed like the type who liked to push boundaries when it came to food, and I foolishly boasted that I had something interesting in the fridge that I could offer. Big mistake. I had recently discovered a type of hot sauce online that claimed to be insanely hot and will burn your soul, you know, one of those internet-famous sauces that people try for fun and then regret. My dumbass thought it would be a fun addition to the evening. So, I confidently went into the kitchen, grabbed the bottle, and returned to the group, expecting a few laughs as Mike tried a tiny drop of it on his slider. I was dead wrong. Without asking anyone else's opinion, Mike took the bottle from my hands, unscrewed the cap, and dumped a whole bunch of the sauce onto his mini slider. He grinned like he was about to conquer something, then took a massive bite. Everyone watched in stunned silence, waiting for the usual reaction, a cough, maybe some sweating, the typical hot sauce reaction. But that's not what happened. Mike's face went pale. Then, he went red. His eyes started to water, and his hands shook. It wasn't the usual "I'm hot but I'm handling it" reaction. No, this was different. It was as though he had just ingested molten lava. He started panting like he was out of breath, but he didn't stop. He chewed a few more times, and then, without warning, he bolted for the door. At this point, we all realized this wasn't a joke anymore. Sarah stood up, looking concerned, while I just stared at Mike's retreating figure. The group followed him out onto the porch, where Mike was now pacing and visibly struggling to breathe. He turned to me, his voice hoarse, and said, I think I need to go to the ER. This is where I completely screwed up. Instead of immediately reacting and asking if he was okay, I froze. In my head, I was panicking, thinking, what have I done? How could I let this happen? I could see the panic in Mike's eyes, but I didn't know what to do. I mean, I knew hot sauce could be intense, but I didn't realize it could have this much of an effect. I didn't even think to grab milk or yogurt to calm his stomach. I just stood there, watching, like an idiot. Mike stumbled towards his car, still visibly struggling, and as he got in, he gave me a look that I can only describe as both confused and slightly betrayed. He didn't say anything else, just started his car and drove off. Now, you'd think that I would have immediately called him or sent a text to check on him. But nope, I made another huge mistake. I thought, well, I'm sure he'll be fine. It's just hot sauce, after all. People eat this stuff all the time, right? So, I decided to go back inside, trying to salvage what was left of the evening. But the damage had already been done. The rest of the group was silent. Sarah looked at me like I was a fool. The whole vibe of the gathering had shifted. I tried to make some jokes to lighten the mood, but it didn't work. Everyone just seemed uncomfortable. A few minutes later, the others started to leave early, one by one. The fun evening I had envisioned had completely fallen apart. Sarah stayed for a little longer, but even she could tell how awkward it was, and eventually, she left too. I was left sitting alone in my living room, a half-empty bottle of hot sauce on the table in front of me, thinking about what had just transpired. I immediately regretted my actions, inviting a bunch of people over for what was supposed to be a fun time, only for it to end in complete disaster. The next day, I reached out to Mike to check on him. He texted me back, telling me that he had to go to urgent care after the hot sauce incident because he started having trouble breathing and his throat swelled up. He didn't hold it against me, but he made it clear that he didn't want to be anywhere near anything remotely spicy for the foreseeable future. I apologized profusely, of course, but I still felt like a total idiot. The rest of the group didn't even want to talk about it, and Sarah, who is usually my go-to person for everything, was still laughing about it, but I could tell she was a bit disappointed in me. So, yeah. I thought I could be a cool host with my crazy hot sauce, but instead, I ended up nearly sending my friend to the hospital and ruining the entire evening. Lesson learned: don't try to impress people with questionable food choices, and always have milk on hand for emergencies. I'll be sticking to safe snacks from now on. TIFU: by accidentally setting off a fire alarm during a big presentation at work and causing an office evacuation. It all started like any other Monday morning. I woke up late, spilled coffee on my shirt, and barely made it to work on time. As usual, I was running around in a panic trying to get everything together, but the most pressing thing was the presentation I had to give. The deadline for this project was fast approaching, and my boss had asked me to present the progress to the senior leadership team. It was the kind of presentation that could make or break my career, or at least make the next few months a lot more comfortable. So there I was, frantically setting up my laptop and prepping the slides in the conference room, all while trying to pretend I wasn't internally screaming. The room was big, too big for a simple presentation. It had this industrial vibe to it with exposed pipes running along the ceiling, and I swear every time I looked at the lights, they flickered. Anyway, I finished setting up just as the clock hit the designated start time. A few colleagues trickled in, including my boss, Dave, who had that look on his face that screamed, "Don't screw this up." The meeting started, and everything was going fine at first. I was clicking through the slides, talking about metrics and progress, trying to sound confident, even though I was pretty sure my heart rate was setting off a whole new set of alarms in my chest. But then, somewhere in the middle of talking about KPIs, key performance indicators for those not in the know, I made a fatal mistake. There was this annoying beeping sound. I thought it was just my nerves, but the beeping grew louder. I briefly stopped talking, hoping it was just someone's phone going off. But no. The sound kept getting louder. I looked up at the ceiling and realized the worst thing ever: the fire alarm was going off. My first thought was, is this for real? Is this really happening right now? But of course, it was real. I mean, I could already see some of my colleagues starting to stand up and look around in confusion. My heart dropped. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I keep presenting? Should I evacuate? My boss's Dave gave me a look that I interpreted as, "Don't you dare ruin this for me," but my mind was running in 1,000 directions. For some reason, I decided to push forward. I tried to continue with my presentation, ignoring the fact that the fire alarm was now blaring so loudly it felt like the walls were vibrating. At that point, everyone had stood up. Some were already making their way toward the exit, while others, like me, stood frozen in place, trying to act like nothing was happening. I tried to speak louder over the alarm, but my voice kept cracking, and I was pretty sure I wasn't making any sense anymore. Then, someone yelled, "Is there a fire?" That was enough to break my paralysis. I looked over at Dave, who was already making his way to the door, and I realized I had to make a decision fast. The whole office was about to be evacuated because of this alarm, and I was the one who was supposed to have everything under control. I quickly packed up my laptop, grabbed my things, and followed the crowd out of the conference room. As I walked down the hallway, I heard someone laughing behind me, and it was then that I realized I had made a huge mistake. The fire alarm wasn't because of a fire. It was because the microwave in the break room had started smoking. Apparently, someone had left their lunch in there for far too long, and it had created a tiny bit of smoke. The microwave wasn't even on fire, but the smoke detectors had triggered the alarm, and the entire office had been forced to evacuate. I stood outside with the rest of my coworkers, trying to keep a low profile. My face was bright red. I was still holding my laptop bag, and I could see people whispering and pointing, no doubt talking about the presentation disaster that had just occurred. I couldn't believe this was happening. Of all days for something like this to go down, it had to be today, when everything was on the line. After about 30 minutes, we were allowed to go back into the building. But my mind wasn't on getting back to work. All I could think about was how I had just ruined my one big opportunity to impress the higher-ups. I wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear. I got back to my desk, feeling like the world's biggest idiot, and tried to calm myself down. I checked my email, hoping for some distraction, but then I saw an email from Dave. I opened it, bracing myself for the worst. Hey / my name, I just wanted to say thanks for handling that situation with the fire alarm earlier. I know it was an unexpected interruption, but you kept your composure and managed to pivot the presentation, even though it was under stressful circumstances. Keep it up. Best, Dave. I stared at the email, unsure if I was reading it right. I'd expected a snarky comment or some sort of reprimand, but no, he was actually praising me. I wasn't sure if he was being sincere or just trying to be nice to cover up the fact that the whole thing had been a disaster. But whatever the reason, I took a deep breath and smiled. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. Sure, the presentation was a bust, but at least I hadn't made a fool of myself completely. I didn't get the promotion that day, but a few weeks later, I did end up getting a big project to lead, and that actually turned out to be a great opportunity. As for the fire alarm? Well, it was later confirmed that it was all because of someone's burnt popcorn, which felt both hilarious and tragic at the same time. I'll never look at the microwave in the break room the same way again. Moral of the story, always double-check the kitchen appliances before going into a big meeting, and maybe, just maybe, don't try to power through a presentation when the fire alarm goes off. It's okay to step out and ask for a redo. TIFU by trying to impress my friends at a party, and ending up in the hospital. I never thought it would happen to me. I've always been the kind of person who likes to joke around, do something stupid to get a laugh, and generally be the center of attention. I'm not really the serious type, which is why, when I was invited to a big house party, I decided to do something totally out of character, try to impress my friends by pulling off the most insane stunt I could think of. I should have known this was a terrible idea from the start, but hindsight is always 20/20. It all started last Friday. I had just moved to a new city a few months ago, and I didn't really know many people yet. A couple of guys from work, who I'd recently hit it off with, invited me to a party they were hosting that weekend. It was the kind of party that had all the right ingredients: a decent house, a pool, a barbecue, and a ton of people. In my mind, this was my chance to finally become part of the group, to be the guy everyone would talk about. You know, the kind of guy who gets invited to everything. So I started brainstorming ways to stand out. At first, I thought about doing something simple like telling a funny story or performing a cool trick, but that didn't seem special enough. Then it hit me, I could jump off the roof into the pool. I had seen people do it in movies, and it always looked so cool. Sure, it's risky, but I'm young, right? What's the worst that could happen? I spent the next couple of days getting more and more excited about the idea. I mentioned it to a few friends, and they immediately got behind it. Dude, that would be epic, one of them said. You've got to do it. It'll be legendary. I spent hours planning it out. The roof was only about 10 feet high, and the pool looked deep enough. I figured I could get a solid run-up, leap off, and land in the water. The whole thing would take no more than 5 seconds, but in that time, I'd be a hero. Everyone would be talking about me for weeks. In my head, I was already the life of the party. The day of the party finally arrived. I was pumped. I even went out and bought new board shorts, a tank top, and a fresh pair of sneakers. I wanted to look cool doing this, and I figured if I was going to make a splash, literally, I might as well do it in style. When I got to the house, the party was already in full swing. There were people hanging out by the pool, music blasting, and drinks flowing. I mingled for a bit, trying to act normal, but all I could think about was my upcoming stunt. I kept seeing the roof in my mind, mentally rehearsing my jump, and imagining the crowd's reaction. Eventually, I saw my opportunity. The mood was right, everyone was a little buzzed, and a few people were talking about doing some crazy stuff to liven up the party. I could tell they were all waiting for someone to do something outrageous. This was it. This was my moment. I casually slipped away from the group and made my way to the backyard. The roof was only a few feet away, and I quickly climbed up a small ladder to the top. As I stood there, looking down at the pool, I started having second thoughts. The water was way farther away than it looked from the ground, and I suddenly realized that this wasn't a small leap I was about to take. My heart started pounding in my chest, but I couldn't back out now. I had to do it. I took a deep breath, ran to the edge of the roof, and jumped. In the air, everything seemed to slow down. I felt like I was flying. But then, in a split second, things took a turn. My foot caught on the edge of the roof, and I twisted mid-air. I tried to adjust my body, but by the time I hit the water, it wasn't a graceful dive. I crashed in, and the impact was so hard that I immediately felt a sharp pain shoot up my spine. I didn't realize what had happened at first. I thought it was just the shock of hitting the water wrong. But when I tried to push myself back up to the surface, I felt a wave of dizziness. I couldn't breathe. My body wasn't responding the way I expected it to. I felt completely disoriented. I tried to paddle, but everything felt wrong. My arms were weak, my legs didn't seem to work, and I couldn't seem to stay afloat. That's when the panic set in. I was thrashing around in the water, trying to stay above the surface, but I was losing energy fast. I must have looked like a drowning man because suddenly, a group of people by the pool started screaming and pointing. I heard someone shout, "Dude, are you okay?" but I couldn't answer. I was too exhausted, and my chest felt tight. Next thing I know, I feel a hand grab my arm. Someone pulled me out of the pool and dragged me to the edge. I gasped for air, my lungs burning. The world was spinning, and I couldn't stop shaking. My heart was still racing, and I felt like I might pass out at any second. A few people gathered around me, looking concerned. Someone called for an ambulance. Apparently, when I jumped, I had managed to twist my body just enough to cause a minor injury to my back and neck. On top of that, I'd also strained a muscle in my chest from the force of the jump. I didn't even realize how bad it was until the paramedics arrived. By the time I got to the hospital, I was in a lot of pain. They told me I had some muscle damage and minor spinal strain, but nothing too serious. It was a relief to hear that I hadn't broken anything, but it didn't make me feel any better about what had happened. I spent the next few hours in the ER, getting checked out, and feeling like the biggest idiot on the planet. I ended up needing a couple of weeks to recover fully. I couldn't move around much, and I had to cancel a bunch of plans because of my injury. My friends from the party checked in on me, but I could tell they were all quietly laughing at my expense. The story of my failed stunt had already spread, and I became the joke of the weekend. The worst part? The party? They didn't even get the big cool jump they were hoping for. I just ended up as the guy who almost broke his back trying to impress everyone. My grand stunt had turned into a complete disaster. I was the guy everyone would talk about, all right, but not in the way I had imagined. Looking back on it, I can't believe how stupid I was. If I had just stayed in the pool, played it cool, and enjoyed the party like everyone else, I would have had a much better time. Instead, I tried to do something insane to prove myself, and it almost cost me more than just a few weeks of recovery. Moral of the story: if you ever get the urge to try and impress people by doing something dangerous, don't. You're probably not as invincible as you think, and no one at the party is going to remember you for that jump anyway. They'll remember you as the guy who got hurt, and that's definitely not the kind of legend I was hoping to become. So, to set the stage, I work at a mid-sized marketing firm in a fairly tight-knit team. It's the type of office where you know almost everything about each other's lives, people's pets, kids, personal projects, so, naturally, some of us tend to get a bit too comfortable sharing personal details. Now, I've been working with the company for about 3 years, and I've always been pretty laid back, mostly keeping to myself and focusing on my job. That is, until this incident. For a bit of background, I've had a long-time crush on one of my colleagues, Sarah. Sarah is a marketing coordinator who works closely with the creative team. She's funny, sharp, and ridiculously attractive, definitely the kind of person who makes you nervous just by walking into a room. For months now, I'd been trying to figure out ways to subtly let her know how I felt, but I didn't want to be obvious about it. I'm generally pretty shy, and the idea of making things awkward in the office terrified me. So, I just kept it to myself. This all changed about a week ago when we had an all-hands meeting. It was one of those quarterly meetings where the CEO goes over the state of the company, upcoming projects, and team goals. Everyone was there, executives, department heads, and of course, the whole marketing team. I wasn't exactly excited for the meeting. In fact, I was dreading it. I'm not the best at speaking in front of a crowd, and the idea of sharing ideas with everyone just makes my stomach turn. As the meeting progressed, people were asked to go up and give short presentations on their departments. It wasn't anything crazy, just a quick status update on ongoing projects. When it was our team's turn, Sarah was the first one to go up. She stood confidently in front of everyone, delivering the update with her usual charm. I could barely focus on what she was saying because all I could think about was how incredible she looked while presenting. But that's beside the point. After Sarah finished her presentation, our boss, Greg, who's kind of a jokester, decided to throw a curveball. Greg has this habit of randomly calling people out for impromptu updates, so naturally, he pointed at me and said, "How about you, Sam? You haven't said a word this whole meeting. What's going on in your world?" The room went silent. My stomach sank. Of course, my mind went blank. I had no idea what to say. It wasn't that I didn't know the state of our projects, it was just the pressure of being put on the spot in front of everyone that made my brain completely shut down. Sarah was standing right there, and now all eyes were on me. I'm sure you know how terrifying that feels. But instead of just muttering some half-baked project update, I panicked. I opened my mouth, and before I could stop myself, the words started tumbling out. I guess I just wanted to say, I really admire Sarah's work. She's been a huge inspiration to me, and I think I might have feelings for her. The room went dead silent. I could hear my heart thundering in my chest. Everyone was staring at me. Greg's face froze in a mixture of confusion and amusement. I didn't even know what to do with my hands at this point. I could see Sarah's face go a little pale, and I immediately regretted everything. This wasn't the way I had planned on confessing my feelings, not in front of a room full of people, and certainly not like this. Sarah awkwardly chuckled, clearly trying to cover the discomfort with humor. "Well, that's sweet, Sam," she said, her voice wavering a little. "But we're just colleagues." The tension in the room was unbearable. My colleagues started shifting uncomfortably in their seats, and I could tell some of them were trying not to laugh or make things worse. Greg, ever the professional, quickly jumped in to save me. All right, he said, trying to ease the situation. "Let's get back on track here. Sam's got a lot of feelings about work, but let's focus on the next item on the agenda." As everyone turned their attention back to the presentation, I wanted nothing more than to crawl under the table and disappear. My face was burning with embarrassment, and I could feel the sweat starting to pool on my palms. I had just confessed my feelings to Sarah, in front of the whole office, with no warning and no plan. It was the textbook definition of TIFU. The rest of the meeting felt like it took an eternity. I couldn't concentrate on anything that was being discussed because I was too busy thinking about how I'd just ruined any chance of ever speaking to Sarah again without feeling completely awkward. I kept sneaking glances at her, but she avoided making eye contact with me. At one point, I saw her whisper something to a colleague next to her, and my stomach twisted. I could only imagine the things she was saying about me. Finally, after what felt like hours, the meeting ended, and everyone slowly filed out of the conference room. I stayed behind, hoping to maybe have a moment to talk to Sarah and explain myself. But by the time I stood up, she had already made a quick exit. I was left standing in the middle of the room, feeling like the biggest idiot on the planet. The next few days were strange. Sarah and I avoided any direct conversations. We would exchange polite greetings in the hallways, but it was clear that the dynamic had shifted. She would always make sure to stand a little farther away from me in meetings, and I could tell she was avoiding eye contact whenever possible. Eventually, I couldn't take the awkwardness anymore. I sent Sarah a message, apologizing for my embarrassing outburst during the meeting. I told her that I had no idea why I said what I did and that I would never want to make her uncomfortable. To my relief, she responded kindly. She admitted that it had been a bit of a shock, but she appreciated my honesty. She also said she was flattered but reiterated that we were just colleagues and nothing more. While it wasn't the romantic confession I'd hoped for, it was a huge weight off my shoulders. Things were awkward for a while, but they eventually returned to normal. We continued working together, and while it wasn't quite the same as before, it was still manageable. I learned a valuable lesson from this experience. Never confess your feelings in front of an entire office unless you're prepared for the consequences. And definitely don't let your nerves get the better of you when it comes to public speaking. Hopefully, my epic failure serves as a cautionary tale for anyone else who thinks they can handle a spontaneous confession in front of a crowd. Trust me, you can't. In the end, things weren't as bad as I imagined, but they certainly weren't great. I still work with Sarah, and we've both moved past the weirdness, but there will always be that moment when I accidentally spilled my heart out to the entire office. If anything, it's a great conversation starter for my friends, and now, apparently, for the whole internet. Never thought I'd become the office gossip, but here we are. TIFU by sending a text message to my mom that was meant for my girlfriend. I'll be the first to admit I'm not the most tech-savvy person. But I pride myself on not being the worst either. I mean, I've got a smartphone, I know how to use emojis, and I can send a text without looking like I'm 75 years old. Still, technology has a funny way of making things go horribly wrong at the most inconvenient times, and I learned that the hard way last weekend. It all started like any other Saturday. I was having a lazy morning, still recovering from a long workweek, lying on the couch and scrolling through my phone. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I had been together for about 6 months, and things were going well. I had never been more sure about a relationship before, and we had been texting nonstop since we met. Now, I'm sure you know how it is when you're in that honeymoon phase, you can't get enough of each other, and everything feels a little more exciting than it actually is. That morning, Sarah had sent me a text that made me laugh out loud. She's got this playful, sarcastic sense of humor that always catches me off guard, and I loved it. The text read, "You better not be talking to any other girls, mister. I'll find out." It was obviously a joke, and I responded with something equally playful, like, "Haha, you know me, I'm all yours." But, what if I'm texting my mom about you? Is that a problem? Now, in case you haven't figured it out yet, this is where things start to go horribly wrong. I have an ongoing conversation with my mom that's just a series of silly, random texts back and forth. Our texts are typically innocent and filled with harmless jokes and updates about my day. But, at the time, I was texting my mom about a recipe she had sent me. She's a big cook and wanted me to try this new lasagna she swore was the best. I had asked her for the recipe earlier in the week, and she had finally gotten back to me. So, after texting Sarah that joke about talking to my mom, I went back to my previous conversation with my mom. At this point, Sarah had sent me a couple more messages. I started typing a reply to her, still amused by her playful tone. I was sitting there with one hand on the couch, holding my phone in the other, and then, in a brainless move, I meant to reply to Sarah with something like, "Haha, I swear I'm not texting anyone else but you," and hit send. Except, I didn't hit the right chat. No. Instead of sending that message to Sarah, I accidentally sent it to my mom. Sure, Mom, I'm not texting anyone else but you. You're the one I love more than anything in the world. Now, you might be wondering how this even happened. It's because I had a couple of conversations open at once. And, like I mentioned, I was distracted and honestly too comfortable just scrolling without paying much attention. I had assumed the text was going to Sarah, and because it was meant to be playful, I didn't think twice about what it might look like. The second I hit send, I realized my mistake. I froze. My mind raced. I felt the blood drain from my face, and a cold sweat immediately started forming on my forehead. The text that was meant for Sarah, filled with inside jokes and playful sarcasm, had gone to my mom. It didn't take long for my mom to respond either. Her message was, what's this about loving me more than anything and not texting anyone else? Is something going on that I don't know about? At that moment, I could feel the anxiety creeping up my throat. I frantically tried to fix things, but my thumbs were moving like they had a mind of their own, typing a million apologies at once. But it was too late. My mom was on a roll. "You're texting someone else, aren't you? Who is she? I can't believe you'd be so disrespectful to your old mother like this." My heart skipped a beat. What was I supposed to say? "No, Mom, I wasn't talking about you like that, I was texting my girlfriend." Of course, I couldn't do that. I couldn't even form a coherent sentence. I stared at the phone screen for what felt like an eternity, my hands trembling. I thought about calling her, but I knew my voice would give me away instantly. My mom is sharp, and she would definitely know something was up. Then came the real kicker. Sarah had texted me again, asking, "So, what's the deal with that message? I thought I was the only one you were talking to." I had no idea how to respond to this either. I had to act fast. I had to make everything go away. The problem was, I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I replied to Sarah with a nervous laugh, "Sorry. I didn't mean to send that to you. I sent it to my mom by accident. It was a joke. I swear." I could tell she wasn't buying it. She responded with, "Right. A joke. Sure." Now I was juggling the panic of trying to fix things with both my mom and Sarah. I wasn't getting anywhere with either of them. My mom had continued sending me messages, each one more judgmental than the last, while Sarah kept texting me with some very pointed jokes about how she was clearly second place in my life. My brain was racing, and I felt trapped in this nightmare. I finally called my mom. The second I heard her voice, she burst into laughter. "Oh my God, I knew you were messing around, but I didn't think you were gonna be that funny. You're a goofball." It turns out, my mom had been in on the joke the whole time. She wasn't upset at all. She just thought it was hilarious. In fact, she later texted me that I better not let your girlfriend find out how much you love me, or you'll be in trouble. But Sarah? She wasn't as amused. She kept teasing me about it for days, sending me memes and gifs about how sweet it was that I texted my mom "I love you" more than anything. Every time I tried to smooth things over, it just made it worse. She even jokingly said, "Well, if I can't be number one, at least I can be number two." Eventually, I apologized profusely and assured her it was all a mistake, and that it wasn't some strange, Freudian slip. After a while, she let it go, but I think I'm still paying for it in subtle ways. To this day, every time I text either of them, I make sure to double-check who I'm sending messages to. Because that was the most mortifying 24 hours of my life, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. So, take my advice, never text your mom that you're not texting anyone else, especially if you've been flirting with your girlfriend. Trust me on this one. And maybe, just maybe, keep your mom and girlfriend's text threads a little more separated. Trust me. TIFU by trying to impress my friends at a barbecue and accidentally setting my house on fire. It all started with a simple idea: throw a barbecue for my friends. I had recently moved into a new house, and I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to break it in and show off my newly upgraded grill. I had never been much of a grill master before, but how hard could it be? I mean, it's just a matter of putting meat on a grill, right? Wrong. I spent the entire week preparing for this barbecue. I bought enough food to feed an army: ribs, burgers, hot dogs, sausages, and even some fancy veggies for the health-conscious folks who'd inevitably show up. The meat was marinated, the drinks were chilled, and the backyard was cleaned and set up with fairy lights and a few outdoor tables. I was really going all out. Then came the big day. I woke up early, got everything ready, and started the grill. I had recently invested in one of those fancy charcoal grills, the kind that promises to make your food taste like it was cooked by a professional chef. Of course, I had no idea what I was doing, but I figured it couldn't be that complicated. I poured in the charcoal, lit it up, and waited for the coals to turn that perfect shade of white. I figured I had enough time to set up the food and get everything else in order before the guests arrived. Here's where I made my first mistake. I wanted to impress my friends with my grill skills, so I decided to go the extra mile and use a little bit of lighter fluid to get the fire going faster. I'd seen it done on TV, and I figured it was a shortcut. What I didn't account for was how volatile lighter fluid could be. As I sprayed it on the coals, I noticed the flames shoot up a little higher than I expected. But I shrugged it off. It'll burn down soon enough, I thought. Wrong again. I went back inside to finish setting up, but before I knew it, I heard a loud whoosh sound from outside. I ran to the backyard and saw the grill engulfed in flames. The fire had spread to the side of the house, and I could feel the heat from where I stood. Panic set in. I couldn't even think straight. I did the first thing that came to my mind and grabbed the garden hose. Now, let me tell you, when you're standing there, watching your house catch fire, the last thing you want to do is mess with a garden hose. The pressure was weak, the nozzle was malfunctioning, and I had absolutely no idea how to aim the stream of water. It was like I was trying to put out a bonfire with a squirt gun. Meanwhile, my friends started showing up. The first person to walk into the backyard was Steve, one of my best friends. He immediately froze, took one look at the flames licking up the side of the house, and said, is this part of the barbecue theme? Because if it is, it's a little intense. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He quickly ran to grab his phone and called 911. As I stood there, hopelessly spraying water in the wrong direction, the flames seemed to be getting bigger, not smaller. I was in full panic mode at this point. My heart was pounding, my palms were sweaty, and I could hear the sirens of the fire trucks in the distance. My neighbors had started coming out of their houses, staring at my backyard like they were watching some sort of disaster unfold. Finally, the fire trucks arrived. By then, the fire had spread to the roof of my garage, and the entire grill area was completely engulfed. Firefighters sprang into action, quickly setting up hoses and working together like professionals. I, on the other hand, stood there like an idiot, apologizing and explaining that I was just trying to make a good impression. When the fire was finally under control, the firefighters turned to me and asked how the fire started. My face went red as I admitted that it was my fault. I was just trying to impress my friends with some grilling skills, but I guess I overdid it, I mumbled. One of the firefighters gave me a long look before shaking his head. Don't ever use lighter fluid like that again, he said, his voice stern. And make sure you know how to handle a fire extinguisher next time. I promised I would, though I wasn't sure when I would be grilling again. I didn't even want to look at a charcoal grill after that. As the fire trucks left and my neighbors returned to their homes, I stood in my yard feeling absolutely humiliated. The barbecue I had planned to be the highlight of the weekend had turned into the worst disaster I could have imagined. But things didn't end there. The insurance company had to get involved. They assessed the damage, and it turned out the fire had caused significant damage to the roof of the garage and part of the house. My once perfect backyard was now a charred mess of burnt furniture and a grill that was beyond repair. I was forced to take out a loan to cover the repairs, and my pride was left in shambles. I even had to cancel the housewarming party I had planned for the next month because there was no way I could invite people over with my house looking like it had been through a war zone. On top of that, I had to deal with my friends. Some of them were concerned, offering to help out or to pitch in for the repairs. Others, though, found it all too hilarious. Every time I saw them after the barbecue, I was met with comments like, "Hey, are you grilling again this weekend?" Or, "I heard fire safety courses are really good this time of year." The worst part was the constant reminders. Every time I looked out the window, I could see the burned patches on the roof or the charred remains of my once beautiful garden. Every time I walked past the now ruined grill, I was reminded of how I had tried to impress my friends and ended up turning my house into a disaster zone. A month later, I got the repairs done and learned a valuable lesson. I've since switched to a gas grill, and I make sure to read up on fire safety before I even consider lighting it. It's safe to say that my barbecue days are officially over, at least until I can work up the nerve to host a gathering again without the fear of burning down another house. So, to anyone reading this, don't try to impress your friends with your grill skills unless you actually know what you're doing. And for the love of all things holy, do not use lighter fluid like I did. Trust me, you'll thank me later. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.